Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I read Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter by Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent. Released in 2021, this book was published by the HarperCollins division Amistad, and it's essentially 50's take on self-help. It's surprisingly more informative than it is antagonizing. And we also get a lot of explanation when it comes to past hip hop beefs, as well as the failures that 50 observed in the people around him and how he assessed that and adjusted his strategy moving forward. Now, background, Curtis Jackson is actually not a new author. He co-authored The 50th Law with Robert Greene. If you don't know who Robert Greene is, he is an author that a lot of people refer to. One of his most popular works is The 48 Laws of Power, and I would say that you can definitely see the influence that The 48 Laws of Power has on this book in particular. But it's kind of a funny thing because if you're familiar with that book at all, Robert Greene actually has said that the reason he compiled all those laws together is because he observed certain traits and certain qualities in successful people. So it just kind of makes sense that there's a correlation between the two. Also, the fact that him and Robert Greene are, pretty good friends, and they have a good working relationship as well. So if you have read that book, you'll see a lot of references, not necessarily overtly, but if you know the laws, then you'll see how 50's able to use it to his advantage. Now, also, just a heads up on a side note, I am still working my way through the 48 Laws of Power. With that particular book, I like to read a law in its entirety and then kind of rest on that information and be able to observe it in the world, and then I go back and read the next law. So hopefully I'll be able to do a mini series on my favorite laws of that book, but we'll see. Now, as far as relevancy in the culture, 50 Cent is everywhere right now, and that is because in the past, obviously, he was the creator of G Unit. He was a rapper, executive, and most recently, he is the creator of Power and all of its spin-offs, which is on Stars. So if you've enjoyed that show, then you know who 50 Cent is. I would say he's definitely a critic of everyone else. He's also a critic of himself, come to find out after reading this book. But if you haven't heard of him, then you probably know what he's up to on Instagram, because he is known for his antics on Instagram. It's pretty entertaining. But also when you look at it, it's a powerful marketing tool, and he does touch on that as well in this book. And above all else, he is someone who is very competitive. So when you really take a look at the actions he takes in the public eye and through this book behind closed doors, you see that everything was done intentionally to put him in a better position. I don't want to say financially, because it's not always really about the money, but just business wise, putting him in a better position to succeed in whatever it is that he's going after at the time. Now, it's interesting because for me, I have a bias when I'm reading a book or when I pick up a book by a celebrity who is not known for being an author or a writer. I assume that the information, the plot, whatever it may be, might be interesting, but I already assume that the writing won't be as good. And that's kind of bad of me, but that's just, when I'm reading Shakespeare or when I'm reading the classics, Zora Neale Hurston, I know I'm getting good writing. But with celebrities, I have that kind of wall up. Surprisingly though, this was a very well-written book, and that is mostly due to the tone, but also the structure. So there is an introduction where immediately 50 answered all of my questions. So going into reading, especially when I'm going to do a review on the book, I always go into it with the question of why was this book created? What was the motive, if there was a motive? And why is this author qualified to give us this information? And that usually comes into play with other nonfiction pieces. And immediately he answered all of that. And so if you ever had any doubt Or again, if you're one of those people in the store that reads the first couple of pages, you already know, boom, here's the answer to your question. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit in my review. But that just goes to show how conscious he is about his standing as far as in the literary world. You know, he may not be a well-known author yet, but he recognizes the power of putting the necessary information in the beginning so that you keep reading. Now there are 9 chapters, and they all open with some sort of inspirational quote from various well-known figures to unknowns, and they really include mainly a personal story, so it's kind of like a testimony to whatever the titled topic is. So it's 50 showing us how he dealt with various things in his life and how he flipped it and made it an advantage to him. So what we see here is there's education through example. With a lot of self-help books, I don't like them because they're more of like they tell you things that you kind of already know. Like, yeah, you have to, you know, study and do this and do that. But with 50, for example, with the studying thing, he said that when he was at, I want to say it was Columbia, that he wasn't the 50 Cent that we all know now. Like, he wasn't this legendary person. He was just another rapper signed to the label, and he would go in and sit with the people in the marketing department and understand what it is they do. Sit with the people in the designing department, understand what it is that they do, and use that knowledge to get him further along in his career. So 50 is really about it, and these are examples that we don't really get often, because with some of these books, these inspirational books, will get them from these people who work in finance or real estate, whatever. But with the music industry, I think he's touching a very different audience, in that he's giving examples of how he made it work in the music industry itself. Now, when I mentioned the tone, this was very important because a lot of people perceive 50 to be aggressive, and he touches on this point as well, but his tone is very level. It's simply instructional. So it's how he navigated through whatever, you know, crisis he had at the time, or how he flipped a situation to make it better for him than whoever he was competing against. So in addition to that, it's very non-aggressive. So he talks about a lot of strained relationships that he has, including 50 Cent, including Ja Rule, but also his son, more importantly, who he has a really tumultuous relationship with, his oldest son. And he said something that really touched me, and that was, I don't know what it's like to be 50 Cent's son. The reason why I picked up on this so well is because it's non-accusatory. You know, clearly the relationship is lacking, and he's acknowledging his involvement in whether the communication is terrible or how he contributed to him being raised, but he's also showcasing self-awareness, which I did not put 50 Cent and self-awareness in the same sentence before. I didn't think he was a person that was a terrible person, but I just assumed that he always moved off of pride and ego and, in that sense, emotion. But he's very strategic, and he understands the impact of his actions and his words, in particular on social media. But that one situation shows that although that's a relationship that it doesn't really sound like it's going to get much better, he knows that he at least contributed to it in some way, and he takes responsibility for that, but also that his son has a life that he really can't comprehend because he didn't grow up like that. So now, lastly, when it comes to writing, I want to touch on the different real life examples that we get. And that is because in nonfiction books, references are important to me as a reader, because it shows that you either did your research or you're well versed in this topic, or if you don't know something, that you're referring obviously to someone who has done the research. In this case, we're talking about real life here. So he is referring to a lot of people who either succeeded exponentially in their fields, started a new wave, or completely failed very hard in their fields. And this list, I'm going to give you guys a list of people. It's a very diverse list. So we're talking, for example, Isaac Wright, who is someone who freed himself from prison by studying law while he was locked up. Or Ray Dalio, who is a hedge fund executive. Deepak Chopra, who is someone who inspired 50 through his spiritual writing. He's a spiritual health author. Robert Greene, obviously, with the 48 Laws of Power. Bill Gates and Paul Allen, who co-founded Microsoft. Bernie Madoff, who ran one of the biggest Ponzi schemes ever. And that's one person who is studied in every business school in the country, basically. Ja Rule, that was an interesting read, as well as Takashi, where he both discussed that with each individual, they were creating this persona that they couldn't really control, and therefore it contributed to their demise. Gilly the Kid, who is or was a rapper, but now he has a successful podcast, but just discussing his relationship with opportunity versus money, and how he kind of fumbled his first, or would have been his first, big deal because he thought it wasn't worth enough, but he didn't see past the numbers and see what that could have given him in the long run. DJ Who Kid, Jimmy Iovine, Enzo Ferrari, and Soichiro Honda. These are all people from various walks of life, from various time periods, and he's referencing all of their experiences to enforce, what he's learned throughout life. And that's important because it shows that he's not stuck just within the music industry. He can see past that. He can see past even the country of America and other countries, what people are achieving and what it takes to succeed there. So this right here just gives legitimacy to him as an author, just because he understands how other people made themselves successful, and he's either modeled, his journey after theirs a little bit, taking some notes from there, or he's just showing you that it's possible to use, this technique in another area other than music or TV or the entertainment industry as a whole. So when we talk about themes with this book, there is one theme, and that is strategy. I've mentioned already a few times that 50 Cent is someone who is aware of the consequences of his actions most of the time. He understands what's going to happen and what he needs to do to propel himself forward. And so I've broken it down into subsections here, but that's the main, honestly, theme of this whole book is business strategy. So the first thing we're talking about is motivation. He does touch on complacency and gives us the cautionary tales of his son, Tony Yayo, and Lloyd Banks. With Tony Yayo and Lloyd Banks kind of being positioned to basically take the reins from him. He wanted them to be, or I think it was just mainly Tony Yayo, he wanted him to be the new 50 Cent, and he was going to take a step back and be, the executive and give the reins over, because he already knew he wanted to achieve more than that. And they kind of just fumbled the bag. And the best way to put it is that they were lazy. And he says a few times that a lot of people aren't built to succeed. They aren't built for it. And if you give them every opportunity, for example, his son, who had a lot of privileges, growing up with wealth and the ability to have a place over his head, not worrying about what he's going to eat, stuff like that, and still not having that ambition, it really works against you. And he says that comfort is a dream killer. And I think that's in terms of obviously physical possessions, but also in the mentality that you have. You cannot be comfortable. You have to go out of your way and face, the unknown in order to achieve farther. So second, when we're talking about strategy, it's important to look at risk assessment, which is something that is taught in like every business class, every business college class. And the general rule being you don't take big risks because they can lead to big rewards, but they can also lead to bigger losses. However, I like that he mentioned that one, he does his research so thoroughly that a plan B isn't necessary. So if someone comes to him with something, he already, not already, but he does his research enough so that he's either in or out. There's no planning, oh, well, if this kind of messes up, then we'll kind of do this. No. He knows what he's getting himself into. But also that it's acceptable to take slightly bigger risks when it's not your money on the line. And that's something that probably is fairly obvious, but you have to recognize that if you're putting all of your money into a project, then you need to be 100% certain that you're going to do whatever it takes to make it succeed. But if someone's coming to you and they already have a plan, they already have the financing, and maybe they just want you to sponsor it or be the face of it or however it works, then it's okay to take a little bit of a larger risk than normal. And I wanted to touch on that because I don't think a lot of people talk about risk when we're mentioning success in business dealings and entrepreneurship. You have to take some sort of risk, but you have to make sure that you can rely on yourself to deliver when it comes time to, and also that you don't need to be betting all your money all the time, okay? So I just thought that was a good thing to touch on, and I didn't expect it in this book. So next, when we're talking about strategy, he mentions diversifying a lot. So that comes in terms of personal, diversifying your friends, as well as your career path, your mentors, and then information. When it comes to information, I've been saying this for every other episode, pick up a book and read. Anything that you want to learn about, anything you have questions about, any event, any person, I can guarantee you there are many books written about it from probably a bunch of different perspectives. So you're going to learn more information that way than if you just ask a question on Twitter. So going out there and just seeking that knowledge and going outside of your comfort zone of what you may know to learn a little bit more. And your friends, having friends from different circles, which was reinforced by all of the real life examples that he gave throughout the book. Also in your career, he talks about evolution a lot and how he made the transition from being a rapper to being a music executive to being an actor to being a TV series writer to now being executive producer and all this other stuff. You have to recognize, one, when your time may be coming to an end in one path and how to make that transition into something else, and making sure that your skills are compatible to transition with you, figuring out a way to apply it. It makes perfect sense to me if someone is writing music. Obviously, in my opinion, you can write a movie, you can write a TV series, you have the knowledge in you. You just kind of have to adjust how you're seeing things, and kind of, instead of writing a 3-minute song, you need to write, a 20-25-minute script. So just understanding that diversifying sometimes means evolving within that space or reaching a different audience than before. And then we have the power of competition, which was my favorite part of reading this book because I really wanted to know what was really going on with him and Kanye West having that album Face Off, and he explained it very well in business terms. Essentially, he used that as a way to one, up his sales, but also to kind of leverage his situation at his label, because what we see is he wasn't necessarily in the greatest spot as his sales weren't reaching the numbers that they used to reach. And this was around the time where CDs were transitioning to MP3s, and people weren't really buying CDs as much. They were kind of starting the whole streaming thing. So he foresaw that, and he adjusted and went forward. And if you read nothing else out of this book, I really recommend reading that chapter, because he's the first person that I really heard talk about competition as something not necessarily positive, but something that could work in your favor and not be intimidated by it. Because you're always going to have competition, okay? But using it to your advantage and going out there and seeking competition, it's ballsy, but it's also, it makes perfect sense when he explains it. So just him giving the examples of the Kanye West situation, but also the Ferrari and Lamborghini situation, where it really increased the quality and the exposure of both brands that they were in competition with each other. And lastly, me being a Marvel head, I had to pull this out. So 50 talks about how he wanted to do with Power what Marvel had done in movies. And this is very important because he had an intentional goal based on external successes. Marvel built a franchise of movies that have captivated people, but have also locked them in for the next however many years. You know, they have movies planned for the next like 10 years or something like that, and I intend to see every one of them, because when you see a big movie like Infinity War or Endgame, what do you need to watch that movie? You need to watch the prior 18 or 16 or however many it was. And so we literally see this happening right now with 50 Cent and Power and all of the spinoffs, and how this is now a franchise of things. And so I appreciate that he's looking at Marvel and understanding what they're doing and applying that to a situation. This is what I mean when I say that he gives us real life examples. Everyone can tell you, you know, the basics on how to succeed, but 50 Cent is actually showing you how he did it, what he modeled it after, his advice, and so forth. And also Marvel, like, that's awesome. I don't know if he's a Marvel fan, but I thought I was the only one that picked up on that Marvel, on top of them having really good movies, the business mind behind Marvel is fantastic, because they really do have people locked in. And now not only for movies, for series, for Disney Plus. I wasn't getting Disney Plus before I heard that, you know, all the Marvel movies were going to be on there, and now the shows are on there exclusively. So that's just another business lesson for you all. All right, we're coming to the end here. I want to touch on the duality that he talks about a little bit throughout the book, and that is between Curtis and 50 Cent. Whereas Curtis is seen as the business executive, he has the benefit of the doubt on strategy. So if he has a good business deal or something like that, people tend to refer to him as Curtis Jackson. When the numbers are up, he's referred to as a mogul in the media. However, 50 Cent, the rapper, is seen as very aggressive, and he gets a shield from criticism though, because if some wild tweet goes viral, people will be like, well, that's just 50 Cent. So, you know, take it or leave it. So 50 can really be the scapegoat when he has any sort of beef. And he's referred to, you know, a rapper, if there is ever any beef. If anyone's stupid enough to beef with 50 Cent, you're going to get demolished. But, you know, when negative stuff is happening, they refer to 50 Cent, which protects the brand of Curtis Jackson. Even though this is the same person, again, this is the power of persona. Okay, so the intention of this book, from the words of 50 himself, it's about learning how to sustain success. You can achieve something, and maybe you mark something off of your vision board, and you might start feeling a little comfortable. You really have to understand that you need to continue to work towards something, and that's success. And I think that he showed that by giving us the rundown on his career for the past 20 years and how he just keeps going. He'll accomplish something, he'll sell however millions of albums, and then, all right, next it's, let's, you know, act in this movie. All right, next, let's write this TV script. He gives us a call to action though, which I like. And he explains how sobriety, exercise, having a right diet, and sleeping well really contributes to his success as well. And I thought that was nice that he included the 30-day rule, that maybe you should try to do something for 30 days first and then, you know, go from there. As well as when it comes to perfecting your craft, identifying whoever is the best in your field and studying them. These are all direct things that everyone can do. And this gives us kind of the kick in the butt and I guess the permission to go out there and start your journey. Unlike a lot of other self-help books, which just gives you the information, he's telling you, all right, so if you want to be a writer, read a bunch of books, study the classical writers, study the writers who are held in a very high regard, and then go from there, start, practicing your craft. So why read this book and why 50 Cent? Well, again, from his own words, he's one of the few to experience a high level of success and pull themselves up from the bottom. So we're able to relate to his beginnings in life and his struggles to get what he wanted. And then, just seeing him all around, he's in the culture again, so he's relatable. People listen to him all the time. And that's really what makes this book special. It's not necessarily about the message. Nothing in this book is new. There's nothing that you probably haven't heard before, but hearing it from 50 Cent, that's what makes it special. A lot of books are written in a language that doesn't feel accessible to everyone. That's another thing 50 Cent says. And so again, I really focus on relatability and how the author is choosing to give us information, because that matters. There could be a wealth of information in something, and if the audience is not able to comprehend it, then it's useless. And so I think that 50 Cent putting his brand on this book does make it special, because it means something coming from him for his fans, or for the people that followed his career, or for the people that were wondering what the hell he was doing battling against Kanye West with that whole album release. This explains it, and it gives us business lessons in the meantime as well. So there were a few critiques. I mean, this book for the most part got pretty good reviews, but the few critiques I had was that, again, it's nothing new and that it doesn't really sound like him, which I picked up on as well. But then again, after reading it and understanding that he does things intentionally on social media, I don't really know how he conducts himself behind, closed doors. So this probably is how he talks about business, but it's just, I've only ever seen him screaming at people on Instagram, which is hilarious, and that's why I wasn't expecting the tone to be so level in this book. But I can understand that critique as well. This is not the 50 Cent that you're probably expecting. This is someone who is teaching a lesson. And honestly, I feel like if we could have a course that I believe is at Harvard that discusses The Wire, then we could have 50 Cent write a book about business strategy. And I think that honestly he should teach a class, because he's very, I don't want to say the word intelligent, but he thinks things through. He takes his time to assess what's happening. And I feel like I keep saying the same thing, but this is important. A lot of people don't put thought into the decisions that are going to affect their lives, their professional lives going forward. This is someone who has admitted to sitting back and observing the situation, observing everyone's role in this label, in this TV industry, whatever it is. And so he knows how it goes, and he knows who to poke, who to push, when to ask or battle or negotiate for stuff, and he does it very well. Clearly, he's still here. There's a lot of rappers that were around in his time, and we still respect them, but who's really checking for them? So I enjoyed this book. I probably will reread it again. I thought it was put together very nicely. It did really feel like a story about 50 Cent's life, but it was very business toned. So it was easy to get through, and I spent a few hours just reading in the car because I just kind of got lost in this story, even though it was about something like I've never experienced, like the music industry. So I do recommend this book. It's definitely a reread, and it's definitely something that if you find yourself in a slump from the pandemic, just unmotivated, this certainly will light a fire under your butt. So the only takeaway I have from this is just whatever it is you want to do, just do that shit. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I will see you guys next week. I hope everyone has a wonderful, safe weekend, and I'll see you again.